Good evening again, everyone. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the public programs producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's book talk for Sons of Survivors Making Peace with Inherited Trauma as part of our Stories Survive series. Now, here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you again for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able to, you'll visit the museum in person to see our current and upcoming exhibitions, including Art of Freedom, the life and work of Arthur Szyk, which opened recently on December 7th, 2025. As I mentioned earlier, closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn those on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box rather than the chat. Now today we are honored to be joined by Aron Hirt-Manheimer, Marty Yura, and Dr. Michael Berenbaum. Aron Hirt-Manheimer was born in the Feldafing PD camp, U.S. zone occupied Germany. His family immigrated to the U.S. when he was 3, residing in Cleveland, Ohio, before moving to Los Angeles in 1960. He received a BA in psychology from UCLA and an MA in Jewish education from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. He founded Davka magazine, a West Coast Jewish quarterly, credited by the Encyclopedia Judaica for its role in fostering a Jewish cultural renaissance. Marty Yura was conceived in the Feldafing PD camp and born after his family arrived in New York. He grew up in the Bronx before relocating at age 16 with his family to Los Angeles. He graduated from UCLA with a BA in psychology, immigrated to Israel, and was inducted into the Israel Defense Forces. He became an officer and served as a field psychologist in an infantry brigade at the time of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Upon completion of his military service, Marty returned to the U.S. and completed his MA in psychology at California State University, Los Angeles. Dr. Michael Berenbaum is an author, professor, rabbi, and advisor on historical films and museum design. He was project director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum from 1988 to 1993 and was the first director of its research institute. Later, he served as president and CEO of the Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, today the USC Shoah Foundation. He was also on the curatorial team of the exhibition Auschwitz Not Long Ago, Not Far Away at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand things over to our speakers.
Okay, my task in this is to moderate between Marty and Aron and to talk about their very interesting and very fascinating book. So why don't one of you begin by telling us why you wrote the book and how you wrote the book and what you shared in common?
Well, I'll begin. Aron and I go back to our last semester in high school in Los Angeles. We became fast friends. We knew it was, of course, apparent that our parents were survivors of the Holocaust. We roomed together, roommates for the first couple of years of college. And then we ended up in Israel, spent time there, went our different paths. But throughout that whole tenure, we really never discussed our parents' history. So other than cursory knowledge of that they survived and data points here and there, we never inquired any further. Our families had different approaches to how they informed us or didn't inform us about their past. And several decades after this, we reconvened. Interesting story, a serendipitous story of Aron's daughter ending up stranded in Atlanta. We took her in. She got back home and reported to Aron, how come you guys don't spend more time together? Because you're just like each other and your homes are the same and they look the same tchotchkes. And that's when we resumed our friendship. And a few years after that, we brought up, or I brought up with Aron, how about we delve into this? Some things led up to that, but that was the genesis of our book. We doubtful that we would have done this individually, but as a joint initiative and with the support one for the other, that's how this began. So we spent 6 years researching, laughing, crying, going deeper every day until we came up and completed the book. And this is why we're here to share that with you.
So, Aron, why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell us the same story in your own way, and then you've indicated what the follow-up questions are going to be easily.
Okay. Well, actually, when we met, it was a coincidence. Marty had just moved to LA, and he was looking to meet some friends, and he was told, you can find some Sons of Survivors at this card game. And he made his way to the card game, poker game, about 5 or 6 of us, all of us children of survivors, it happened to be. And at the end of the game, he and I walked home, and we discovered that we lived in adjacent buildings on the same street. So that's the first coincidence. The second coincidence was 50 years later, when my daughter family got stranded in Atlanta, and because of that, we got together again. So as Marty said, after a while, certain things happened, like he went to Auschwitz for the first time on a Zen Peacemakers retreat. And when he got back from that, I asked him to write something for Reform Judaism magazine, which I was editing. So he wrote something, and that began a conversation about the Holocaust and his saying he wanted to do a book. And I said, why don't we do it together? Now, the interesting thing is, we thought it would be easy to do. So Marty flew up to Connecticut, and we thought we'd start taping a conversation. And the conversation would essentially be how the book went. He would tell me something, then I would tell him something. But it became very apparent that we knew very little about our families. And not only that, it was only then that we discovered that both our fathers had been in Auschwitz, both our mothers had been in the same complex of concentration camps, Gross Rosen, and both he and I were conceived in the same displaced persons camp in Feldafing in Germany. So we didn't even know the basics of our own relationship. And here we were going to write this book about what happened to our parents, but not only that, but how it affected us at every stage of our lives. So that's when that 6-year journey together began. And the book tells the story of from childhood through grandparenthood, how we dealt with the trauma of the Holocaust.
So let's start with a very basic. Really, you've outlined for me. You made my job easier, which is that you've outlined. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Those of you who are getting set for Passover will forgive me for not asking 4. But the first question is, tell me about your parents' experience. Then tell me about what Marty said, which is what they did tell and what they did not tell. And then the real question, which you guys probe so very interestingly, is what the role of inherited trauma has been for both of you individually. And then I guess we have to ask collectively. So I got you four questions, anyhow.
So I could start with the first one about the parents' experience. And that is it's related to the question of what they told us and what they didn't tell us. Um, at the beginning of the project, it was my understanding that my parents had told me a lot about, they spoke about it. They did not keep it a secret. So it was always my perception that I knew a lot and they had told me a lot. It was only when um, we started really looking into it, only recently that I realized that my father never talked to me about the Holocaust. And yet I knew a lot about what happened to him, but he didn't have to tell me because I just had to look at his body and I could see the Holocaust written all over it. He had the tattoo, the Auschwitz tattoo. He had um, he had scars on his chest and on his back where bullets went through him when he jumped off the train after the evacuation of Auschwitz. He had a permanent blue mark on his knuckle where the capo in Mauthausen, where he ended up after he was shot, beat him. And he had a hollow in his back where he had his ribs moved in order to be treated for tuberculosis after the Holocaust. So, he was never a fully healthy person. He had a quarter of a lung for the rest of his life that he could use. The rest had been taken out. So there was no need for a conversation, really, but I did find out some things from other sources later. My mother, what I did know mostly from my parents, what they told me was how my mother escaped from a death march. A very dramatic story. Also, after the concentration camp, uh, you know, Greenberg, after they marched 1,000 women toward Czechoslovakia, and she was one of the few who survived. The story of how she survived, it was a miraculous story. Um, when she could no longer walk, she was too beat up, too tired, could not, too exhausted, weighed 70 pounds, couldn't go any further. She and 20 other women were put on the back of a truck to be driven to the woods to be shot. They all knew that that was their fate. But suddenly, a fighter plane flew overhead, an American fighter plane. This was very close to the end of the war, and strafed the truck, and the German guards, women guards, were all hit, and none of the prisoners were hit. And at that moment, my mother pulled herself off the truck with her friend who she had shared a bunk with in Greenberg concentration camp, and got into the woods. And that was how she was saved. And that was May 5th, 1945. My father was.
And for people to know that the war ended on May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. So think of it as May 5th, 1945. It is 30 seconds to midnight in the world of the Shoah.
Yes, so here we are and my parents were engaged in 1941. And then they had an engagement party in one town in Poland, in Dąbrowa. And then they were going to have their engagement party in Bendine, which was nearby. And during that week, my mother was taken away to the concentration camp. So that was 1941. Now, let's get back to my father. He jumps off the train. He's shot. Some people pick him up, patch him up. Uh, they see he has a number on his arm. He's reported to the Gestapo. He's sent to Mauthausen and for special punishment. And that's February 1945 when he gets there. Mauthausen is liberated on May 5th, 1945, the same day that my mother in Czechoslovakia, he in Austria, Mauthausen is in Austria, same day, he is like a skeleton, a breathing skeleton who's pulled off a pile of bodies and resuscitated, and he lives. And as the story goes, they find each other in 1940. They find each other, and eventually in 1947, they're finally married in Feldafing in the DP camp, where I'm born a year later. So what I knew was fragmentary. I didn't know how the pieces fit together. But later, and I could tell you how I discovered more of it, but that's basically.
Let's go to Marty and here, and then I'm going to come back to both of you with its impact on you. Marty, why don't you give us your family background as well?
Well, the fragmentary details of what Aron shared dwarfed what I learned. So no one said anything to me growing up. Part of the discovery process in writing this book was that I learned that my father had a family, had a wife and two daughters, all of whom were killed in Auschwitz. And the conspiratorial commitment to avoid my exposure to that past was quite strong. So no one in the family shared anything. It was verboten. One cousin, one aunt had a little blurb in my young teens. Didn't know what it was. I didn't pursue it. But not until I returned from that first year in Israel as a student, I was 20 years old, did my parents sit me down, and they began to tell me about my father's past. So not only was there an absence of information, there was a strong commitment to not provide that information to me.
Let me ask you a question, Marty. Nothing leaked out.
Nothing leaked.
No. I mean, it's normally that which is not said we know that which is not said has as much power often as that which is said, but most survivors, even if they didn't speak, something leaked out in an attitude, in a statement, finish your plate because I was once hungry. I mean, something had to leak out. I'm trying to.
Let me draw the distinction. It wasn't that there was not a concealment of the fact that they survived the Holocaust. What was concealed were any details, personal details about what they went through. So you could not ignore, they had an accent, they had friends, they celebrated with fervor our generation of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. So there was a, very cohesive community, but no details. And not only from the family, I'm quite sure that they made sure, or they requested, and it was adhered to, that nobody spilled the beans about any details. So, reference eat your food because people are hungry, that wouldn't have impacted my experience. It wouldn't have been a shock to my system. So let me say it like that. There were no shocks to my system
There,
from
but there
personal
were
history.
there were signs. There were signs that we only recognized later. And
Yeah,
I'll give you an
yeah.
example. Marty and I lived uh, next door to each other. I have a sister, a younger sister, and she always hung out with me and with Marty. So she would come over. Marty's father and my sister was very shy. She would not really relate to most adults. Marty's father had a very special relationship to my sister. Uh, he and she felt that special relationship, and he would love to slice apples for her and give her a piece of cake, and they were she was very comfortable with him. Now it turns out that uh, that his older daughter in the first marriage, who died in Auschwitz, was the same age as my sister when he lost her, and um, that that relationship that they and they kind of looked alike too. So that there was these things going on underneath that we didn't really get at the time, but certainly when I talked to my sister about it later, and Marty talked to her, and she was like a sister to Marty. Um, so those things came out. Another thing that Marty didn't mention, but I happen to know, is, and it's in the book. That's how I know it. Whenever, as a child, whenever Marty heard that a child was in trouble or died or was sick, Marty would cry and inconsolably. And what he was mostly focused on was the loss that what the parents were feeling, the loss of the parents and the emotions they must have felt, you know, when their child was ill or in trouble. Uh, these things were, again, didn't understand it. But to answer your question, Michael, these were the things that came through that could not be held back. They were there. The emotion, you can't control the emotions. They come out. They find a way to come out. Whether you know it, what happened, or you don't know what happened, you can't really eclipse it.
So now let's ask the other part of it. Tell me, you guys had two elements of the impact on you. One is the impact you weren't aware of until you began to focus on it. Marty ends up going to the Yom Kippur War and joining the IDF and all of that. And the other is now as uh, mature men looking back at your past, what was its impact? So let's start with the impact as you were, let's say, kids growing up. What do you think the impact was then, and what do you think of the impact now? Because part of the interesting part of the book is the difference between what you were aware of then and what you came to be aware of now.
I think that it's important to understand the context of our social life. We were part of a community that was really closed off, even from the Jewish community when we were growing up. The reason, I believe, is because when the survivors came from the DP camps, they quickly realized that nobody was interested in hearing their stories. Uh, there was kind of there was a conspiracy of silence, it was called. Uh, and so the survivors, they were viewed as damaged goods. They were even viewed with suspicion. How is it possible? How did you survive? I mean, you had to do something to survive that was, you know,
And
unethical.
the accusations were cruel.
They
The
were cruel.
the
They were
accusation of a woman is whom did you sleep with, and the accusation of man is whom did you betray, and
yes,
that may be very difficult for a younger audience to understand. because survivors now have a revered place in American society, but that was not the case when you were young boys.
Right. So the implication of that, you know, so our closed group, our closed society, mutual aid society, we helped each other. So all my friends were children of survivors, except for one. Um, so we didn't trust people outside of our circle. It was very difficult. My mother said, if anybody asks you a question, always say, I don't know. Maybe if they ask your age, you could tell them, but nothing more than that. When I grew up, if I would encounter, on a rare occasion, some non-Jew would, you know, my parents would have them over for something. What the first thing I would look at those people, this is as a child, and I would think, would they hide me in their basement? Would they hide me in their basement? So there was this lack of trust and this insular community, and that really had an impact on us. So that was one of the factors. All of us, Marty and myself, we all had dreams or imagine that we would take revenge, that we would avenge our parents. I wanted to shoot Hitler. Marty wanted to throw glass out of an airplane on Germany. My sister imagined that Hitler was captured, put in a huge glass bottle, and then people on ladders would spit into the bottle until he drowned. That's what she dreamed. So we had this certain kind of anger, this desire for revenge for what they did to us, to our family, to kill our grandparents and our uncles that we never met. So that was part of growing up.
Yeah, well, I have a different angle on that. So I grew up in New York, streets in the Bronx, a big mixing of ethnicity and religion. My close friends were not kids of survivors. Best friend wasn't Jewish. So I didn't have that dimension going on. And we had a superintendent in the building. So in New York, you have somebody who's a super, clears the snow and maintains the building. He was German. His wife was German. His sons were German. He was a mean-looking guy, with a scar on his face. Mr. Weber.
I think we have the same super.
Maybe the same guy. But so the point here is, despite the absence of detail of the history in concentration camps, the prevailing attitude, and I think it stemmed from my father, and this guy, the superintendent, was the super. He is the example here. Was never one of anger. It was always one of, respect might be a far cry, but it was a semblance of respect. So, Aaron's example, when I was a little kid, I was going to fly and drop broken glass over Germany. That's as a little kid. But growing up, the background, and I had a bit of a cantankerous uncle, my mother's brother. He was the holdout. He remained bitter to the end of his life, all his 95 years. But my father, my mother, certainly my aunt, the rest of the family did not have a vengeful position against Germans, against Nazis. And that's one of the hallmarks of an insight of what we got, both of us got. This is not just a correlate of my family. I think as a generation, there was not the focus on the past, but rather a strong, intentional, I think very, very magnanimous loving is again, awkward word to use here, but now in a context or from the altitude I view it as now, there was a context of forgiveness and moving on and providing lives or opportunities for us or their children that did not have a lick of revenge.
I want to say that what I was describing was as a child, but I had an experience with my father that was very much along the lines of the story that Marty just told about the super. The one time my father was able to visit Israel, which was his lifetime dream, I accompanied him. And it just so happened that we had a stopover in Frankfurt, Germany, a layover overnight. When we got to the airport, and I saw these armed German guards speaking German, of all things, I said to my father, those damn Germans, how could you stand it? And he said, Aaron, one thing you must remember, not all Germans were bad. It was very much, he did not want me to be hateful. He wanted me to be above that. And considering what he went through, for him to make that point at that moment was very significant, and I never forgot.
And it's interesting. I'm not a child of survivors. I'm a child of my grandparents were fortunate enough to leave in the 1910s. So my parents were what we might call dreamers, born in Europe, but with no memory of Europe, and came over here as children. But the first time I was in Germany and I heard the words Achtung, I froze. Absolutely froze. And I travel a lot to Europe on business. And every time I come to Frankfurt Airport, which is a huge airport, the first time I hear Achtung, a certain shudder comes in mind. And again, as a non-child of survivors, I have that. That's different than hatred. Tell us a little bit about, because it's interesting. Let me preface this. I have a doctoral student who started off writing about a vicarious trauma and then had to write as she got to toward the end of her work. She wrote about vicarious trauma and vicarious resilience. So the question is, you speak of inherited traumas. Did you also get inherited resilience?
Without doubt, absolutely. It defined our environments. There was, you couldn't not glance back at the past, but you also, when I say you, I mean the milieu that within which we grew up. That's not where the lens was pointed. The light was pointed forward. So the vicarious dimension of this, we were always aware of that, and we still are. I mean, it's not. We haven't mastered this thing. Every day I walk down the stairs from our bedroom, and in the hallway there is a large rendering of a photograph of my father, his first wife, and the two girls. I look at that, eyeball it several times a day, and it's so there's an omnipresence to that because it's a reaching back, it's a reminder, and we figured out you can't outrun it. It's always going to be there, but the only access to not being eaten up by it is to distinguish that it's not now. It's a whole different time frame. So once you can distinguish, it's not happening right now, and the instant after you react to the album, and you realize it's now and not then, that's the pathway out of the tunnel. And it happens quickly, but sometimes it doesn't happen so quickly. So the making peace with the inherited trauma, certainly it can, by definition, it's a vicarious trauma and it's a vicarious resilience. But the resilience, really, just looking at it now, was apparently stronger than the trauma. Less dramatic, perhaps, but the resilience is what I believe I think we've witnessed in our parents and in that entire generation. And even if you shift the focus to Israel and all the people that immigrated to Israel and fought in the War of Independence and still had a cousin who fought in 3 wars in 48, 56, 67, there was, perhaps to a degree because the enemy was displaced instead of Germans, there were, Arab enemies. But I was never witness, not in my family, certainly, but really nowhere, to a hardcore uh, context or perspective of revenge.
Can I say something, Michael? When you said the word vicarious, um, it reminded me of something in the
By the
book.
way, I have to apologize for that because in one sense, for you, it's really not vicarious. And that is, it is inherent in your own existence. I grew up in an environment surrounded by survivors and refugees. So for me, it becomes vicarious, but I know you guys are not going to get insulted, but I really should apologize for the word vicarious because your experience is dramatically different.
My experience was very much vicarious, and I'll show you some evidence of it. I went back to my father's town of Bendine. It wasn't my plan or my intention to go there, but a series of circumstances brought me there. And it was I went there on a Jewish press tour of Poland after Poland was liberated from communism, and they were looking for Jewish tourism. So they brought a group of Jewish journalists over there. And I said I would go there only on condition that I'd be able to visit my father's town of Bendine in Poland, in Upper Silesia. And they came back and they said, well, that's only about 20-minute drive from Auschwitz, and we're going to Auschwitz, so we'll stop at the town. So we stopped at the town, and we were looking for the Jewish cemetery, and we were walking down the main street. And this is what happened. I'm reading now from the book. As we continued walking along Malachowski Street, a thought popped into my head. What if Hitler had not rechanneled the course of history? My parents would have been married in Bendine. I would have grown up in this place. Suddenly, the imaginary number lifted from my arm. For the first time in my life, at age 47, I was able to liberate myself from an identity that was not rightfully mine. What had happened to my parents during the war had not happened to me. So that was an amazing realization, because emotionally, their pain was my pain. I didn't really totally separate it out. I had to be in that place in order for that to happen. So that's what vicarious means to me.
Well, thank you. We're asked a question raised really by Marty, and which I guess we're all experiencing today. Then versus now. How do you feel about the now with the world of exploding with anti-Semitism? And do you feel echoes in a very real way, as a whole range of people are hearing echoes? I notice, folks, I'm not saying equivalences. I don't think this is 33. It's certainly not 38, and it's certainly not 42. But we're asked then versus now. How do you feel today with the rise of anti-Semitism, in spite of your attempt to move on?
Well, we respond in the book to October 7th, what happened in Israel, Hamas, and how that, when you have this trauma living inside of you that is built on uh, what happened to our people, and then this happens, and you witness this, you get such a spike of trauma. It just rises up because it's always below you. It's always there. Like the cover of our book has, it's got palm trees and sun at the top. It's got Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau at the bottom. It's always there. And there's certain things that really bring it out. For me, it started with the Six-Day War when I thought Israel would be annihilated. That's what got me into my entire career. I said I would never be on the sidelines of history. Now what's happening, it's absolutely, impacting the trauma within us. But we have learned to deal with it. We have learned to accept that that's part of who we are. And there are times when it will show itself when we least expect it. Certainly now we do expect it. But often even in times of joy, I'll give you an example. At the Shabbos table, we always have our grandkids here and our kids, they live nearby. And one night, my wife lit the candles, and I saw the sparkle in my grandchildren's eyes. And suddenly I thought 1.5 million children, just like them, were murdered just because they were born Jewish. That is inside of me. So here, we hear a synagogue where somebody drives a truck into a synagogue with the intention of killing as many people as possible, and over 100 little Jewish kids in there could face death because they're Jewish. So it's very traumatizing, what's going on now. So on one level, there's no way to get around that. How we respond to that, well, it's different. I look at the long view. The long view is that there has been anti-Semitism as long as there have been Jews. Since the time we first entered the stage of history, there has been anti-Semitism because we are other. We're considered other because we insist on our otherness. Marty and I insist on our otherness, but we also are part of humanity. What we learned from our parents is good will always triumph over evil. That's what my mother taught us. That they believe they gave the world another chance. They believe that goodness will win, love over hate. That's what our book is about. That's what they taught us. And we believe that as bad as things get, as terrible as they are, it's not something that we should believe is like totally outside of the realm of history. It's part of the long road of Jewish history. But in the end, we have to be on the side of light. We have to be on the side of goodness, love, and we have to fight in every way, be active and fight for peace and for acceptance and for compassion and for humanity. And Marty and I share this very, very deeply. So we're very disturbed, very traumatized by what's going on, but we know what side we're on.
Yeah.
Marty?
And let me throw in one more thing, Michael. My take on this, my reaction to say current affairs, I think the senior distinction is I look at it as a human being, and I say that not as not as a Jew, but the larger context for me is as a human being. So that's where the disquiet is. That's where the stand that Aron is talking about comes from. And I think, we've been shaped by our Jewish identity, but we're also shaped by our human beingness.
I'm going to ask Isabel. I'm having a little bit of a difficulty getting the questions that have been put in the chat. So I'm going to ask Isabel to step in and ask some of the questions that have been put in the chat, please.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few additional questions that have been asked, but also to our audience, feel free to submit more questions while we're talking. We have a couple questions sort of directly related to your book and the experience of writing it. Um, the first one, actually, a couple people have put this in the chat and would like to know, Aron and Marty, how your families have reacted to the book and what it has meant to them.
May I
Well,
speak? Okay.
well, my wife has nudged me for 40, or been married 41 years. And until we did this, she has told me, she has encouraged me, she has tried to persuade me for decades to do this. And my kids have read the book as we were writing it. So the family was totally supportive. I think they're gushing with pride that we did this, both of us, and they realize the significance, the impact that our book can have on so many people.
Let me ask a half of question to that, Marty. If your parents were to have read that, how do you think they might have? I'm presuming that all of your parents have now died just by virtue of age. But Marty, in your case, how do you think your parents would have responded to the book?
This the same way they would have responded to my grandkids.
Okay.
You know, with
You don't
that.
have to say.
Yeah,
You don't have
you
to say.
understand.
You don't have
You
to
got
say.
it.
You don't have to say more.
You got it.
Aron.
Yes. Well, I'm very fortunate that my mother is alive and well. She's 105, and in June she'll be 106. And she can't give away enough of this book. Okay, she absolutely loves it and gives it to everyone because it's her story. Michael, you were the moderator when Marty and I launched the book in Los Angeles. The Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles sponsored it, and you were kind enough to moderate. And you asked the question, what did having children mean to your parents? Well, it so happened that before you asked that question, maybe an hour before you asked that question, Marty and I went to visit my mother, who lives walking distance from where we had that event. And I asked my mother, I said, Ma, is there something, a message that you would like us to give to the audience when we speak about the book? And she thought about it for a minute, and then she didn't say anything, but she reached over, we were sitting at the table, and handed me a framed photograph of herself with me at age about 2, when I was about 2 years old. And she said, just show them this. For the people who survived the Holocaust, who lost their families, to be able to start over and have children was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to them. In Feldafing alone, there were 700 children, I believe. A population of about 4,000 Jews, 700 children born, something like that. The biggest population boom anywhere.
Let me be a pain in the posterior historian by saying that the largest birth rate in all of post-war Europe were in the displaced persons camps.
Right.
And theologically, that means, to my mind, that Jews responded to death by recreating life.
And that was,
and I don't know anything more important to say that. And the poet once said that the birth of a child is the birth of hope, because
exactly.
a child is infinitely possible. The rest of life makes us finitely possible.
So that was her message. So that's my mother. My three kids, both Marty and I interviewed our kids. It's part of the book because we asked them, what is it like for you to have been grown up, third generation? And they all gave their answers. But what came through was the pride that they all felt in their grandparents who survived, that this was a victory. They don't think of them as victims, they think of them as heroes. So our families are, so happy that this book exists, this family legacy that they now have and that they can share and pass down the generations.
And do you feel lighter having written the book?
I feel, well, in some ways, yes. I feel that I did what I resisted for most of my life. I've edited Elie Wiesel. I was the editor of the Holocaust Library, published books about the Holocaust, but I kept my own family story at arm's distance. And it wasn't until we did this book that I had a book that my uncle, the only surviving member of my father's family, his brother, who moved to Argentina, wrote a book in 1961 in Spanish under the pseudonym because there were Nazis living in the neighborhood. But he wrote this book, he handed it to me, and he said, I want you to translate this book. And for 50 years, it collected dust. I finally had to translate it. His grandson translated it. And I learned things that happened to my family when the Nazis occupied Bendine. Amazing stories, learned things that I should have known all along, but I wasn't ready. So now I was ready, and now I learned it, and I have a certain sense of closure. But the amazing thing is, when I go out to speak, I'm constantly learning new things. These coincidences that made this book possible keep happening, and people are telling me things that are blowing my mind about additional information, other people's experiences. Like it's all part of a big web, and the journey continues, the story continues, and it will never end as long as I'm alive.
Marty?
Yes.
You feel lighter?
Much lighter. It not only do I feel it, my family feels it. It's evident to them. We walked around for decades and decades with this under wraps of sorts, and it has been tremendously cathartic, tremendously freeing. So it has expanded dimensions of life. Yes.
Could you have written it as younger men?
Nah, nor alone, nor individually.
Well, we have one comment in the questions that is a very special comment. Comment is by Aaron Bell, who said he's a Belsky. And interestingly enough, he writes he's a Belsky of the movie Defiance, but he's a Belsky of the Belsky Brigade. And he said, I always felt less trauma, I think, as my father and uncle saved lives, but they couldn't save my grandparents, so I have trauma. So that again, the different experiences go in a variety of different ways. Isabel, do we have other questions?
Yeah, we do have a few other questions, and I think we have probably time for one or two more. Um, we have someone who's asking Aaron and Marty if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like working on this book together, and in particular, if there was anything that really surprised or really challenged you about the process.
Well, well, like I think I've said twice, uh, couldn't have done it. Wouldn't have come out the same
Hmm.
alone individually. So we leaned on each other. There were hard times. Uncovering this is kind of akin to sticking your head in the mouth of the dragon. You know there are teeth there, and you get nipped. So it was invaluable, and it would just not have happened. Um, Certainly not the same way if we did it individually.
You know,
So
one of Marty cries easily. He's a mushy man. Um, and I had a fear of crying I didn't cry at my father's funeral. I delivered the eulogy. I just couldn't cry. It's kind of like if you cry, when will it end? The well of tears is endless. So I intellectualize things. I became, so Marty was always, he cried easily and I didn't. So one Yom Kippur, you know, late in the writing of the book, after we've been working on it for a few years, I pulled the eulogy out of a drawer that I hadn't looked at in decades and hadn't read again. The eulogy I wrote for my father. And I read it and I cried. And I called up Marty, who was, he was just on a walk. He was meditating. He was taking Yom Kippur very easily. And I called him up and I said, Marty, can I read you this? And I read it to him and we cried together. Um, Through this process, by doing this together, and that's what it means. Whenever something hurts us, whenever we get a revelation, immediately we call each other, and that becomes part of the book. It becomes the part of that conversation. The book is made up of stories. I tell a story, he tells a story. I tell us through our lives. So it's alternating stories. So this becomes part of the fabric of the book. And for for Marty at the beginning of the book, on Yom Kippur, nobody could get near him. He didn't fast. He didn't do anything Jewish. He just went into a hole, and it was terrible. And through this process, he reconnected with the meaning of Yom Kippur, and he became part of it. He started streaming services for Yom Kippur. So went a tremendous distance. So we traveled together, and we changed, and we evolved, but like the woman who my mother pulled off the truck when who shared a bed in the concentration camp. Those people who didn't have a buddy, somebody to go through it with them, didn't have as good a chance to survive. It just so happened that a lot of coincidences brought us together again after many years of separation. And then it brought us back so that we could do this together. So that's what it was like doing the book with Marty. And we started like brothers, and now we're like brothers again.
And having read the book, the very interesting thing is that your voices start out as different voices. And gradually, you have to look at the beginning of the chapter to find out whose voice it is. And that means because you are drawing closer and closer together as time went on. Let's again stress this is a very important book to read. And I know from looking at some of the questions from the audience that many of you are children of survivors. And this is a book that will offer you an opportunity to reflect upon the life of someone else and maybe an opportunity to reach out to someone else to share your life with them. So let's turn it back. Let me say again, Marty and Aron, this is our second time together in conversation. We could go on for another hour, but the museum is the timekeeper, and I'm going to turn it back to Isabel, but not before I say thank you. And we all deeply appreciate how candid and how personal you've been with us.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you are right on time at 8:01. So you yourself were an excellent timekeeper as well. I think, unfortunately, that has to be the end of the Q&A, but I think that's a lovely place to end it. I would just like to echo what Michael said and thank all three of you for such a wonderful program this evening. Of course, I'd like to thank our audience as well for being here with us. And really quickly, before we leave tonight, if you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll also consider making a donation to support the museum, which you can do at mjhnyc.org/support. We also hope to see you for our upcoming programs, which you can learn more about at mjhnyc.org/current events. We hope you have a great night and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.